Good evening. My name is John H., and I'm an alcoholic. In this Code Blue Big Book Action Seminar, we're going to go through the recovery section of the Big Book line by line. We are going to take the action that our founders and the first 100 people who recovered say that we must do to overcome this seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body. Now, I don't claim to be any kind of a big book and 12-step guru or expert, not by any means. I am no kind of deep spiritual advisor. I'm just a simple drunk who was almost dead from the disease when a couple of recovered alcoholics reached out their hand to me and said, "We have a different way." Now, this is based on the Canadian method pioneered by the Golden Slippers, but I also borrow heavily from the Joe and Charlie Big Book Weekend tapes, from Chuck C., from Clancy, and from all of the giants upon whose shoulders we are riding. Now, I would love it if you could grab a couple of friends and listen to these sessions together, because working the steps with other people is always more powerful than trying to go through them alone. So you're going to need a large print big book, a highlighter, and a pen, and some willingness. And as you guys will see, we open every session with a set-aside prayer to more open our mind to be more receptive to this information. Thank you so much for listening. Good evening, everybody. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, John.
During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now deceased, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the big book kind of group, especially for those people who could just not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AA meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who have done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions in our basic textbook using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps exactly as given to us by those who have gone before, unfettered and unchanged. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who have been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been, in effect, left off at step 3 or step 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we don't take the action as described in our basic textbook, we might not recover. These study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. So I start every session by reading that. Next, what we do, and we're going to write this in our book, but we now open up. If you're able to get on a knee, I ask you to get on a knee, and we open every session with this set-aside prayer right here to help us open up our minds to this new experience. And again, we'll get this written down in your book, but it's right there for now. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Peace. Peace, amen, however you want to end it. Now we, introductions, and I'm going to be passing around the 7th tradition. Give if you can. If you can't, that's okay. All right, guys, so we're gonna start out. I mean, today is just kind of basic housekeeping, and we're going to go through the forewords of the book to get just a little bit of history. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. But my sponsor, I went through my first treatment at age 24. My world crashed around me at age 24. And even back then, I thought that my only solution was to take my life. I went through treatment at age 24. I got out. And, I didn't even know about the program Alcoholics Anonymous. And for the next 25 years, I came in and out of these rooms and in and out of treatments. I went through a total of about 8 or 9 treatments. And the one thing that I never did is I never did the work in this book. But what I did, when things got really bad, I'd go through treatment, and when I got out of treatment, I would go to a meeting every single night, and I found that I could stay sober that way. If I went to a meeting every single night, I could sometimes get 2 months, 3 months, once I even got 6 months. But I was always restless, irritable, and discontent, and I was never comfortable in my own skin, and I always thought about the day that when I can take that next drink. Fast forward to, and I relapsed. I mean, funny enough, we got to be careful because I relapsed on NyQuil. You know, hey, what's that going to do? You drink a NyQuil, then you go to the drugstore and get 3 more. You know, then you just go to the liquor store. Pills from the dentist. Relapsed on gambling. And I'm not telling anybody else that they have to watch out for these things, but these things always led me back to my love of alcohol. I was a blackout drinker. In 2011. I couldn't take it anymore, and I had a rather elaborate plan on how to take my life, and I was saving pills, and I was going to go up to the Boundary Waters. I had about 1,000 Vicodin and 60 Ambien, and I was going to take them and go over in a canoe. And I had life insurance in place for 2 years because I knew that if I and a lot of it, I knew that if I did it before the 2 years, they were going to take a look at me a little more carefully. So at the end of that 2 years, I was all set to go up to the Boundary Waters, and God had a different idea for me. I went on a 2-day blackout, and I woke up in the emergency room, and they had confiscated all of my pills. So I didn't have anything, and I'm like, shit, what am I going to do now? I went home. And I spent a week. I had enough stuff squirreled about my house, and that was my loneliest week of my life because I lost my job. I was fired, running out of money fast, running out of alcohol, running out of drugs, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought about hanging myself, and that was my plan. And finally, after about a week of this, I called my sister and I told her what was going on, and of course she was horrified. But they got me into detox. They got me into detox the very next day. Well, actually, she told me, she said, get out your card and start calling. She made me call, and I found a place, and they took me. And I got out of detox, and I knew I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew that, what my past was. So I went back, and I got my job back, and I started working, and I had a routine where I got up in the morning at 5:30, I went to the gym, then I went to work, and after work I went to a meeting, and then I went home. And I did this 7 days a week. And the first three months were okay. The 4th month, I started to get really antsy. I was becoming angrier, more fearful. That restlessness, irritability, and discontent was building and building. And by the time I got to 6 months, I was thinking about taking my life again sober. I stopped drinking and my life got worse. At this point, I heard some guys talking about a different way to approach things, and they said, well, we're doing this Code Blue, and what we're going to do is go through the book, and we're going to do the work, and they guaranteed me that if I showed up to every session, and I did everything that they asked me to do, they guaranteed me that I was going to have a spiritual awakening, and I didn't know what that was. Basically, they said, you're not going to feel restless, irritable, discontent, full of hatred and fear, and worry, and anxiety and all these things and thinking about drinking every day. They guaranteed me that stuff would go away. And I said, well, you know what, man, I got nothing left to lose. I don't think that's going to work, but I'm going to try it. And that was my Hail Mary pass. And it was starting in 2 weeks. And I made it those were very long weeks. But I made it through those 2 weeks. And the minute I walked over the threshold into that first session, a feeling came over me that it was going to be okay. I mean, I can't describe it. It just, I said, hey man, I think I'm going to be okay. And I showed up to every session, and I did all of the work. And I mean, every morning when I got up, I would think about, is today the day I'm going to drink, or am I going to drink myself to death? Somewhere halfway through this thing, the obsession to drink was lifted out of me. Right, a little further along, I noticed that I got up in the morning and I wasn't waking up saying that, I'm going to get that son of a bitch, or I'm going to get fired today. I had all these things that my head was racing, a regular committee going on in my head. That stuff went away too, and I couldn't believe it. We finished up. I did all the steps. We finished up and they were doing another one, and I felt so good. I said, I better go through this again. So I immediately went through another one. That was done. They were doing another one. I said, you know what, I better keep going because, you know, I got 35 years of this nonsense and I don't want to go back to it. So I did another one and they had me greet and do a little reading. And then by the fourth one, they said, well, you're going to run it with me. And so I started running it with a couple of guys, and halfway through they bailed on me. So I finished doing it by myself, and I've been doing them ever since. This is about, I think this one's my 14th one. And I want to make that same promise to anybody in here, you know, who is struggling. They have that obsession where, you know, they got to fight it every day. They got to fight that obsession to drink, and they're restless, irritable, discontent. If you show up to all of these sessions and you do all of the work in this book, I am confident that the same thing that happened to me is going to happen to you. Everybody that I've sponsored on a one-on-one basis that's gone through the book with me and done all of the work is sober today, to the best of my knowledge. Everybody that's gone to every Code Blue session and done all the work, and that's not a high percentage, but every one of those people that's shown up to every one and done all the work, to the best of my knowledge, they're all sober too. So, you know, if you're worried about, you know, my God, you know, drinking, we know what to do. We know what the answer is. It's in this book. And all we've got to do is we've got to do what it says, but we've got to do exactly what it says. So we're going to start out by writing something in our book. At the top, write your sober date. That's your sober date. I got to tell you guys, they had me do that at my first Code Blue, and I wrote it there, and I said, well, what happens when I relapse? I'm going to have to change it. They said, write the date, right? And I wrote that date down, and, you know, whenever I thought about taking a drink, I looked at that date, and I said, I'm not changing it, man. I am not. So write your sober date at the top of the book, and then I want you to put your name and phone number. I mean, the only place you bring your book is to Alcoholics Anonymous clubs and meetings. If you go through this Code Blue, all the notes and the information in this book, if you leave it some way, you're going to want it back. So write your sober date at the top, then put your name and your phone number right at the above Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? And then we're going to write something else above Alcoholics Anonymous. We're going to write, and let me go, I've had a particularly trying day today, so I just coffeed up, so I might be going kind of fast. But we're going to write alcoholism, not alcoholism. And we're going to triple underline the ism, and we're going to triple underline the wasm. That's alcoholism, not alcoholism, right? This is a lifelong disease. It's a lifelong disease. And, you know, I always thought that I could go through treatment, I could get sober, and I was fixed, right? But no, this is a disease of perception. The way that we look at things, the way we treat other people, the way that we're cut off from God, we're cut off from ourselves, and we're cut off from the rest of the world, right? So it's alcoholism, and it will always be that, not alcoholism, okay? So now, and again, this is what my sponsor, I'm not asking anybody to do anything that I didn't do, and all my sponsees do this too. So under Alcoholics Anonymous, I want you to write this right here. Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol? And if it applies to you, you can write and drugs, right? Then I want you to put yes, and I want you to sign it and date it. Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol and drugs? I had to write them both. And I signed it and I dated it. You know, and I kind of wondering about that, and you know, my second sponsor, you know, when there were some things that I didn't want to do, he paged back to that and said, look here, young fella. And he showed me that I had written that down, and I had signed it, and I had dated it, and my life was starting to get so much better that I didn't argue with him. The things that I found objectionable, I did them anyway. Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol and drugs? Sign that baby, date it. Okay, we're going to go to the next page right here where it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's where we're going to write the set-aside prayer right there. That's the set-aside prayer. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. And you know, I didn't really understand that prayer, and I didn't know what it meant, but I wrote it. and I said it, and I say it a lot today. And I think what it means to me is when I came into these rooms, I knew everything. I had preconceived ideas about just about everything. And as I went through the work in this book, I discovered that my lifelong conceptions about how the world was, about what I was like, and about God were wrong. They were wrong. You know, I came here to quit drinking, but I discovered that I needed to learn how to live, and the way that I thought and behaved was wrong. So God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Amen. And again, that is how we're gonna open every Code Blue session. One other thing too, guys. You know, I've been sober. I've been sober about 5.5 years, and I don't think I know enough to inflict my own opinions on everything, but I am an alcoholic, so I might do that. So I want everybody to know that if it's not in the big book, it's my opinion, right? So if it's not written in the pages of this big book, you can say, John Henry, where did you get that from? Can you show me where in the literature it says that? And if I can't, then you can take it or you can leave it alone. And I hear that phrase in AA a lot, take it or leave it alone. But if it's in the pages of the first 164 pages of this book, you would better take it. You would better take it. Because that one thing that you don't take might be the thing that saves your life. And that's what my sponsor told me. And he said, we are going to do absolutely everything it says. And I think we're going to discover that there's about 111 musts in the first 164 pages, and we're going to circle them all. But again, if you don't see it in the book, it's my opinion. You can take it or leave it. So let's go to contents. Contents. So we're going to draw a bracket. We're going to draw a bracket around preface, forward to the first edition, second, third, fourth. We're going to draw a bracket around that, and we're going to write brief history. Brief history. We're just going to get a little bit of a layout of the book. So preface, forward, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Bracket it and write brief history. And again, anybody, if we got a lot to cover, so sometimes I do go fast. And again, you know, guys, I want you to remember a lot of stuff that I did seemed absolutely silly to me. It seemed silly and ridiculous, and oftentimes I would think to myself, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to do that, it's nonsense. And here I was dying, wanted to kill myself, and I'm saying that's ridiculous, I'm not going to do it. So if something does seem silly, you know what? Let's do it anyway. Let's do it anyway. Next to the doctor's opinion, we're going to write brief history, step 1. Brief history, step 1. And there's more stuff, but for the most part, this is how the book's laid out. Bill's story, step 1. Or you can just write 1. There is a solution 2. More about alcoholism 2. We agnostics 2. How it works 3 and 4. Into action 5 through 11. Now that's into action, that's not into thinking. Into action, 5 through 11. Working with others is 12. And then we're going to bracket the last 4 chapters, to wives, the family afterward, to employers, a vision for you. Bracket all those, and we're going to write, practicing these principles in all our affairs. Practicing these principles in all our affairs. And for me, that was the hard part. I found I could be a pretty good fellow for 1 hour a day. But as I discovered, practicing these principles at home and at work was the much harder part for me. So practicing these principles in all our affairs. And then the last one, a vision for you. Draw a little arrow. We're going to write something else about that one too. We're going to write building a fellowship up around you. So a vision for you, you get a double-decker. You get practicing these principles in all our affairs, and you get building a fellowship up around you. And again, if anybody starts getting hot, we can open the window. I'm going to use you as my canary in the coal mine, so when I see you're done writing, I'm gonna move on. So.
But I missed 3 and 4.
You missed 3 and what did you miss?
3 is...
More About Alcoholism is 2. We Agnostics is 2. Chapter 5 is 3 and 4. 6 is 5 through 11. 7 is step 12.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to the preface. XI. So, we're going to write a lot of stuff, and we're going to do a lot of highlighting. And one of the other things my sponsor drummed home to me, this is our textbook for recovery. And he said, if you live with alcoholics and you want to hide some money, hide it in your big book, right? Because nobody looks in there. He also said, John, you take that big book to every meeting you go to. And I said, well, I don't want to lug that around. He said, what if you're in a meeting and there's a newcomer there and you know that there's something in that book that is going to help save this guy's life, and if you've got your book with you, you can find it and you can help him. If you don't have your book, you're going to kick yourself. And I found that to be true. So, that's why you always see me walking around with this book. And I mean, it's starting to fall apart. But, all right, so, preface. I'm sorry, at the top of the page we got to write something. We're going to write, meetings are for fellowship. Meetings are for fellowship, right above the preface there. Program is for recovery. Meetings are for fellowship. Program is for recovery. There are 2 great powers in these rooms. And one of them is the fellowship. That's the meetings, the coffee, the going to Perkins, the sober softball. That's vital. That's a wonderful power that we can use to help us, right? That's what's going to support us. But the program is what's going to change us. So the program is for recovery. Meetings are for fellowship. Program is for recovery. Preface. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939. And in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. So you know what, guys? There's roughly 40 million alcoholics in the world, probably more by now. We've got about maybe 28 million books out there, and we've got 2 million people in Alcoholics Anonymous. The number of people that we see come into these rooms every day and every week, there should not be halls big enough to hold us, and yet there are. That's because the vast majority leave. They go out and they're still drinking and they're still dying. Right, so that's because when I was one of those people, because I came in and I didn't do any of this work, I would go to meetings, and I'd go to a lot of them, and I felt horrible, and I would say, "Dad, burn it, that AA doesn't work. It doesn't work for me," right? But no, I didn't do the work for AA, right? So there's 25 million books floating around out there somewhere. Hopefully, people will start reading them. Because this book has become highlight. The basic text, highlight that, and off to the right next to that, we're going to write textbook to be studied. Textbook to be studied. The basic text for our society, circle the word society, and off to the left, we're going to write group can be a higher power. Every time Bill speaks of a deity or uses a word as a deity, he capitalizes it. So for starters, the group can be a higher power. I'm going to say for starters, that's okay.
Would you mind handing me a
different highlighter? Sure. There you go.
Thank you very
One of those. I know there's a couple of red herrings in there. They're dried up.
Thank you.
Yep. So, next to society, group can be a higher power, and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. There exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Highlight the next 3 lines. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th editions. So highlight that. And then off to the right, you can write first 164 pages. First 164 pages. You know, and I see it every day. I see people, they say, John, that book is out of date. That book has no place in today's modern age. I don't believe a word it says, and it's certainly not going to help me. I see people in these rooms saying that all the time. And what I say to that is I say nonsense. And the reason I say nonsense is because alcoholics haven't changed. Right? We haven't changed in thousands of years. We're still getting drunk, right? We're still crashing cars, killing people. We're getting divorced. We're getting fired. We're getting thrown in prison. We're killing ourselves. We're miserable, desperate, and afraid. Alcoholics have not changed, right? Alcohol hasn't changed, right? The flavors have changed, the bottles have changed, the strengths, the packaging, the marketing, all of those have changed, but ethyl alcohol is the same as it's always been, right? And the way it affects us hasn't changed. And guess what? Human nature never changes. That never changes. We're the same people today that we were 3,000 years ago. Do we think the same things that Aristotle, Socrates, Solomon? Doesn't matter. This human nature never changes. So this program and this book works just as good today as it did in 1939 when it came off the press, right? So don't let anybody tell you it's out of date. The section called that's why when I said the dictionary, this is our little dictionary. These are terms that may have changed in meaning a little bit. So this is that dictionary that I spoke of right here. And when we get to some of these words and the meaning has changed, we'll talk about that. The section called the Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth. Highlight Dr. William D. Silkworth. When I say highlight, underline, same difference, however you're marking the book up. And next to that, we're going to write neurologist treated over 50,000 alcoholics. So this guy knows what he's talking about. Neurologist treated over 50,000 alcoholics. William D. Silkworth. Our society's great medical benefactor. The second edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA, but the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the 3rd edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added. In Part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added. Okay, so we can write, next to that, you can write Experience, Strength, and Hope. And I believe that's the name of it, and that's a book where they've got all 56 stories from all of them. It's called Experience, Strength, and Hope. And I bought one several years ago, and it's still gathering dust on my bookshelf. But it's called Experience, Strength, and Hope. It's got 56 stories. This 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. Okay, why all this, and why are we reading it? Because the fellowship is changing, right? Bottoms are going up. More women, more young people, people of color. I mean, we're not the same as we were. We're constantly changing. So let's highlight the next 5 lines. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. Okay, so highlight that. And that last 6 words that I read, and thereby to reach more alcoholics, right next to that, let's write primary purpose. Primary purpose is to carry this message to the still suffering alcoholic. Okay, so right under where you wrote primary purpose, we're going to write the program in a nutshell. You can just write nutshell if you want. 1 is trust God. 2 is clean house. And 3 is help others. Trust God, clean house, help others. That's the program in a nutshell. 6 little words. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. Right? And again, I've got my little note written again that if it's not in the book, it's my personal opinion, right? So, let's make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, so forward to the first edition. This is the foreword as it first appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We, circle that big word we right there, right? You don't need to write this, but we can do what I can't. We can do what I can't. And now, anytime in the first 164 pages where it says the word we, it's not the people in the meetings that you see every day. It's not the people in New York. It's the first 100 men and women who did the work and recovered from alcoholism. Right? So keep in mind, I'm an alcoholic. I think I know more than anybody, right? If I'm reading a book and I don't agree with it, I say, well, this fella doesn't know what he's talking about, doggone it. But if we do that to the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, we're arguing with 100 people. We're not arguing with one. Right? Because Bill Wilson was the primary author, but he had to have everything approved by the other sober members before they put it down in print. So off to the right where you circled we, you can write 97 men, 3 women, 60 Akron, 40 NYC. 97 men, 3 women, 60 in Akron, 40 in New York City. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women, okay, highlight the next 4 lines, who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. You can stop highlighting there. And where it's recovered, I want you to circle that word in addition. And then off to the left, write never cured. Never cured, okay? And I also want you to go up one line and circle the word precisely. They're going to tell us exactly what to do. Exactly. They're going to tell us exactly what they did and how all 100 of them recovered. Now, this word recovered creates all kinds of controversy. And whenever I say that I'm a recovered alcoholic, it's always an old duffer. The old duffer says, you can't recover from alcoholism. And I say, you know what, man? When I came into these rooms, I couldn't stop drinking. And once I started drinking, I couldn't control what I took, right? I was miserable, desperate, angry at everybody. I hated you. I hated me. I wanted to kill myself. And you bet I've recovered from that hopeless condition of body and mind. And I was near death. I was near death physically too. And I have absolutely recovered from that situation. Now, I'm never cured, okay? So we're going to discover that there's things that we have to do on a daily basis to stay recovered. But we can indeed recover from this hopeless condition. I don't care what anybody tells you, you can recover. Our book tells us several times that we're going to recover. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication, circle authentication, and you can write valid proof, so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend, highlight to the end of the paragraph, that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So here for the first time in modern history, they're saying that alcoholics are sick, right? Up to this point, Every alcoholic in the world has been told the same thing. You have weak willpower. You have low moral character. What you do is sinful. Why can't you pull yourself together like other people? What's the matter with you? So this is the first time in history that they're saying that we're actually sick, that we're not a people of a very low caliber. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation, underline avocation, and in that little margin you can write volunteering/free time. Volunteering/free time. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship highlight to omit his personal name, just that little bit there, designating himself as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So after Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to write no last name outside of club, right, or outside of meeting. No last name outside of club or outside of meeting. But believe you me, if I'm at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting or I'm at this club, I want everybody to know that my name is John Henry and I want them to have my phone number, because what if they need to get a hold of me? What if they're thinking about taking a drink? What if they're thinking about taking their life, right? So in here, we're not going to be anonymous to each other, right? No last name outside of club. And back in the day, of course, the stigma involved in this was so much worse than it is today. At work and in my family, everybody knows that I'm a recovered alcoholic, but quietly. I don't trumpet it. But they know, because if they've got a family member, I want them to know that they can call me so I can direct them to meetings or maybe hook them up with a sponsor or do something to help them. So, but I do that quietly outside of the club. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no dues, no fees or dues whatsoever. Put a 7 above that. The only requirement for membership is an honest, circle honest, desire to stop drinking. Above that, put a 3. These are traditions, by the way, traditions. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination. Put a 10 above that. Nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Highlight the next 3 lines. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. And then circle that word work. Circle that word work. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. So, right under Alcoholics Anonymous, let's write must work with others. Must work with others. And a little later on in this session, you're going to hear about the first time, I always joke, I say, my sponsor made me raise my hand, right? You're going to hear about my first experience working with others and how that allowed me to continue to grow. And keep in mind, when we progress through it and we read about Bill Wilson, the primary author of this book, we're going to see that in the first 6 months, Bill Wilson was running all around New York City trying to help people, and he got nobody sober. Nobody. He wasn't able to sober up anybody. But one person, that was Bill Wilson. He stayed sober himself. Forward to the second edition. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered, circle the word again, recovered alcoholics. And then draw a little arrow off to the side of the page there and write, they have done the work. That's all it means, that they've done the 12 steps and they live by them. They have done the work. Recovered alcoholics. They have done the work. Groups are to be found. And by the way, I don't care. I mean, I've had people go. I had one woman who came up to me at the end of Code Blue, and she says, John, I got to come clean. I've been introducing myself as an alcoholic, but I'm just a regular person, but my life was falling apart. She said, I went through this thing and it changed my life. A regular person, right? I mean, I've had gamblers, I've had overeaters, I've had heroin addicts. This work works for everybody. And I don't know the exact date, but I mean, Al-Anon used it until maybe, 1968 when they wrote their own or something. And all the other fellowships use these 12 steps. NACA, OA, I'm sure there's a lot of A's that I don't even know about. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury. Circle augury and we can write omen, foretelling, prediction. Only the augury of a much larger future ahead. How prophetic is that? Omen, foretelling, prediction. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk, highlight to the end of the page, between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual, don't turn the page. We are going to, at the bottom, let's write Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson, he's the New York stockbroker. And then Dr. Bob Smith. Dr. Bob Smith is the Akron physician. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, I guess you could say.